Everywhere around, there are always some enlightened personalities rushing about, calling for universal love and forgiveness. You can pull this illusion over yourself like a blanket over your head so as not to face harsh reality directly. And indeed, it does become easier. But deep down, a person still cannot grasp why they should force themselves to forgive those they hate and love those they are indifferent to. What's the benefit? It feels unnatural and forced, as if joy should not come on its own but must be squeezed out of yourself like toothpaste from a tube. Of course, there are people who don't believe life is so boring and primitive, reduced to a single predetermined fate. They don't want to settle for what they have and prefer to take joy in their achievements. For such people, there is another concept of destiny. A person is the architect of their own happiness, and as everyone knows, happiness must be fought for. How else? The wise will say that nothing comes easily. If you don't want to accept happiness as it is given, then you must elbow your way forward and earn it. Instructive stories testify to how heroes fought bravely and worked selflessly day and night, overcoming unthinkable obstacles. The victors gained the laurels of success only after enduring all the hardships and struggles of relentless battle. But even here, things are not so simple. Millions fight and toil, yet only a few achieve true success. One can spend their whole life in desperate struggle for a place under the sun and still achieve nothing. So what is this life? So cruel and uncompromising. This heavy necessity of battling the world and seizing what you want? And if the world won't yield, then you must battle yourself. If you are poor, sick, ugly, unhappy, it's your own fault. You are flawed and therefore obliged to change. A person is confronted with the fact that from the very beginning, they represent a cluster of deficiencies and vices that must be corrected through effort. A gloomy picture, isn't it? It turns out that if a person wasn't lucky at the start, not born rich and happy, then their fate is either to bear their cross humbly or devote their entire life to endless struggle. Hard to find joy in such a life. Is there truly no light at all in this hopelessness? And yet, there is a way out. A way as simple as it is pleasant, unlike all the others listed above, because it lies in a completely different dimension. The concept of destiny and transurfing is based on a fundamentally different model of the world. Don't rush to wave your hands in disappointment and exclaim that you're being handed another chimera. Agree, every known concept of destiny is built on a certain worldview, and every worldview in turn rests on certain unprovable premises. For example, materialism is based on the claim that matter is primary and consciousness is secondary. Idealism asserts the exact opposite. Neither statement is provable. Nevertheless, on their basis, models of the world are constructed, each very convincing, each with devoted defenders. The space of variations is a tangible informational structure, an infinite field of information containing all possible versions of any events that can occur. One could say that everything exists in the space of variations. We won't speculate on how exactly this information is stored. For our purposes, that doesn't matter. What matters is that the space of variations serves as a template, a coordinate grid, for any movement of matter in space and time. At every point in space, there is its own version of one event or another. For easier understanding, we'll consider a variation to consist of a scenario and decorations. Decorations are the outward appearance or the form of manifestation, while the scenario is the path along which matter moves. For convenience, the space of variations can be divided into sectors, each with its own scenario and decorations. The greater the distance between the sectors, the stronger the differences in scenarios and decorations. A person's destiny is also represented by countless variations. Theoretically, there are no limits to the scenarios and decorations of human existence, since the space of variations is infinite. Any minor event can influence the turning point of fate. A person's life, like any other movement of matter, is a chain of causes and effects. In the space of variations, the effect is always located close to its cause. One follows the other, and so the sectors of destiny line up into lifelines. The scenarios and decorations of the sectors along one such line are more or less homogeneous. A person's life flows steadily in one direction until an event occurs that changes the scenario and decorations. Then fate makes a turn and transitions to another lifeline. Imagine you watched a play. The next day, you return to the theater to see the same play again, but this time, the decorations were different. These are closely located, lifelines. The following theater season, you watch the play with the same actors, but with significant changes in the script. This lifeline is already further away. Finally, when you saw the same production in another theater, it was a completely different interpretation of the play. That lifeline lies very far from the first one. Reality manifests itself in all its diversity precisely because the number of variations is infinite. Any starting point unfolds into a chain of cause and effect connections. By choosing the point of reference, you receive a particular form of reality's manifestation. You could say that reality unfolds along a lifeline, depending on the chosen point of reference. Each person receives what they choose. You have the right to choose precisely because the infinity of variations already exists. No one forbids you to pick a destiny you like. All control over fate comes down to one simple thing: making a choice. Transurfing answers the question of how to do this. So, there exists an informational structure containing an infinite number of potential possibilities, variations with their own scenarios and decorations. The movement of material realization happens in accordance with what is embedded in this structure. The process of matter moving through the space of variations can be demonstrated by the following thought experiment. Imagine a tube filled with water. Along the tube, a cooling ring slowly moves, freezing the water quickly, but only within the ring. Ice crystals form and move along the tube with the ring. The water molecules themselves remain more or less in the same places in a relatively free state. At the moment the ring passes, the molecules within it are fixed into a frozen crystal of a certain structure. Then, the water in that spot thaws again, and the molecules are released. The crystal itself doesn't move. In other words, in this case, the ice in the water does not flow. What moves along the tube is not the crystal of ice itself, but the structure, the frozen state. By analogy, the water in the tube is the space of variations. The ice crystals are the material realizations of variations. The molecules are people, and their position within the crystal structure is realized as a version of fate. There is no definitive answer to the question of what the cooling ring represents. In other words, how and why an informational structure transforms into matter. In the micro world, matter can manifest as a cluster of energy. It is known that in a vacuum, there is a continuous process of the birth and annihilation of microparticles. Matter kind of exists, and at the same time, it does not have its own material substance. One thing is clear: what can be touched rests on an intangible, energetic foundation. I hope I haven't tired you out too much with physics. For now, we are only at the starting point of transurfing. But what you will learn from this book may shock you to some extent. That is why I inevitably have to provide at least some theoretical foundation, so that your mind does not lose the ground beneath its feet. So I ask you to be a little more patient.